Have no fear, Camera Conspiracies. After this video, you will understand scopes, and nobody will be able to lord their scopey knowledge over you.
I'm going by eye. If I read the scopes, if I'm being honest with you, I don't fully understand them. So it's like, oh, this should be there. The saturation in your vector scope, oh, don't get past a certain wave. So I almost understand it, but every day, man.
We have to go back in time. In fact, if you went back in time and tried to understand a lot of video technology, you would understand a lot of what's going on today. And you'd have even more material for humor. So back in the late 1980s, this is a camera I used when I worked for a production company. It was a JVC and had 3 tubes. And the light obviously came through the lens and it hit a prism. And you could probably guess, you probably remember or have heard of some of this, it would go into these 3 tubes. So it's called a 3-tube video camera. And again, state of the art back in the late 1880s. And in the first tube would be red, and then green, and then blue, of course, right? RGB. So the light would split up into these through the prism, and a red copy of the image would go here, a green copy, and a blue copy. And these tubes would be, voltage would go through them. They basically then output a voltage. The voltage to the size of how strong the light that was hitting was. And it would go through this table, and it would go to a video recorder, tape video recorder, that was analog. So none of this is digital. It's all analog. And I'm not going to actually go into how it's encoded. You know, it's used as a zebra pattern, you know, raster pattern, just like in a TV. Well, we won't go into all that. But suffice it to say, they're analog voltages. And when a voltage comes out of the red tube, let's just say, if it's strong enough, when it tries to magnetize the tape, it'll just saturate it. So there's a point at which it can't saturate the tape any longer. And so it becomes what we call clipping now. And that's what these meters were about. So in my day, you didn't have these 3 colors. In fact, this viewfinder right here was black and white. And there might have been like sort of a waveform thing in there probably. I don't remember. But anyway, back in those days, and I keep, I don't know why, I think my elbow's going up against the keys. Anyway, most of the scales were green because they're green cathode ray tubes. They weren't, you know, red and blue like this. This is a modern representation. Back then, everything was green, so you just switch and it would tell you which channel you were looking for. So in these early days with these tubes, you'd want to make sure that each tube was outputting the same amount of color as the other. So you would put a gray card in front of the camera, you would shoot it, and then you would dial in each tube to make sure that they all sort of like peaked at the same time. And that's probably what you were looking at right here. Well, probably not this, but anyway, it was something like this. And you just make sure that all 3 tubes matched. Again, that no voltage was going above the maximum voltage it would be written to the tape, because that would be clipping. And so it's IRE, I forget what it stands for. But anyway, it was basically, is there too much light that's, you know, basically oversaturating your tape, like pull off. And this is the same thing with audio too. But that's what the scopes, that's what what you're looking through with the scope. But again, in those days, very crude things. Like if you watch a movie from the 1950s or 60s of a submarine, you know, you'll see some of these oscilloscopes in there. Now, one of the problems I have with Davinci putting in these types of scopes is that when we're now in digital. So in this scale, you see it's at 1023. So that's 10-bit, right? So that's a 10-bit scale they're using. But you can just as easily map a scale of 8-bit, which would be 1 to 255. So, or 0 to 254. So this would be 0 and this would be 254. So when you're working with Davinci Resolve, you know, if these things go above 255, then obviously they're not going to show up because we don't have a place to put the data. If you're trying to put in a number that's 256 and you only have to 255, there's nowhere to go. It just becomes a 255, and that's clipping in the digital world. So anyway, this is how the scopes work. The general idea is that you just want to sort of make sure your color is sort of in the middle, right? It's not down here in the shadows where it's very noisy, nor up here where it's clipping. You know, just basic stuff. So I don't think you really need to think about them in any more fashion than that. Just know that they're legacy scales or legacy visualizations of color luminance back from at least, well, for me, 40 years ago, right? But probably the first TV cameras, maybe within years of the first TV cameras, would have something like this that would show you when, as you're scanning the image, when the voltage is going above the saturation point or when it's sort of falling below where it can pick up. Okay, you also mentioned how, oh, you can make it brighter, or you can change the curve. So there's so many ways of changing the color. Which one do you use and stuff like that. So, you've been having a lot of issues with software lately. You're talking about the Mac and the IBM. And a lot of your confusion is just based on, just as I just pointed out, your lack of understanding of some fundamentals here. Sorry to be rude, which I had a joke. So anyway, what goes on really? The thing is that DaVinci Resolve from Premiere, all these software make it look like that there's tons of data, all kinds of brightness data, hue data, temperature data, brightness, contrast, whatever. All these like controls. It just looks like you're dealing with this massive rocket science type bunch of data. And there is rocket science in the algorithms in a sense, but actually the data is so beyond simple. What I'm about to describe to you, if you don't understand it, I don't think you'll actually believe it. So here are your luminance panels down here. Let's just pick like this point right here. So we're going to take this pixel right here. That's going to match these three components. And let's start. Imagine you have an HD frame, right? So an HD frame is 1920, as you know, by 1080. And if we multiply 1080 by 1920, we basically get 2 million pixels. So 2 million pixels, and their times, if we're doing 30 frames per second, times 30 frames per second, you can do the math. That's a lot of pixels. And from what's happening behind the scenes in this type of software is for each pixel, you have memory, basically a 24-bit memory set aside. Now we're going to put aside compression in all of this. We're just going to assume that you're compressing or decompressing into the actual valid, color for that pixel. So we have a red, green, and blue value, right? So we have a little box. They'll take a value for each pixel. So if this is the waveform, let's just say we're looking at this pixel right here, right? But what I'm explaining to you, the logic again, it applies to all 2 million pixels, 30 frames a second. So we're talking about 60 million pixels a second that DaVinci Resolve will have to process. But it processes each pixel. That's it. So it basically has a table. So in this case, it might have a red of, let's say, 100, and a green of 90, and a blue of, say 15, right? So it's 190, 15 for this pixel over here. But for each pixel, again, there's a memory block, and it has these three values. And this is a shocker. This is it. This is the only value. Whenever you stop doing something in DaVinci Resolve or anything like that, and you're looking at the output, all you're looking at is, again, 1920 by 1080 pixels, each with a number inside them. Now, how did it get to those numbers? Well, the original footage that you have will have these numbers in it. So let's just pretend that these are the original numbers, that you shot the video, and at this pixel location, these are the values that you have, 190, 15. So now what happens if you, let's just say, make it brighter? You move the brighter up a little bit. What you do, and we're going to get to lookup tables too, but essentially you just create another table. We would call it a lookup table, though it works like a lookup table. You might call it a modification table, right? So you can do a modification table of brightness. And in the modification table of brightness, you might put under red, plus 10, green, plus 10, and blue plus 10. If you're doing the brightness evenly for all the colors. But if you're using one of those curve things where you're doing each color separately, these could have different values. So you have another table which will take this and it'll create, if that's the only change you make, it'll create 110 to 100 to 25, right? That's all it does. So if the only thing you did when you loaded your video is increase the brightness a little bit, it would output, instead of 100, 110, instead of 90, 100, you get it. Again, for 2 million pixels, basically 60 million pixels a second. So there are multiple ways of doing this. And I think, again, many people think, oh, well, there's, it's looking at the image and it's doing some brightness stuff with the brightness data and then the color data, and then it's changing some hue data. No, there's no separate hue data. There's no separate brightness data. We're going to get into the brightness in a sec. There's just those 3 values per pixel, and it's doing that. So let's just say, you talked about, oh, people say the Apple computer is so fast at video editing, but I did a bunch of color grading and it's super slow. Well, why is it super slow? Again, if you understand this, you understand why. Because each one of these things here, each one of these, I forget what they're called, the join doohickey things, each one of these represents another transformation. So let's just even call this a transformation. Here was the brightness transformation, but you could have all kinds of transformations, changing the hue, changing the gamma, changing the brightness, whatever, right? And each transformation, a box, right? Each box that you're lading up, all you're doing, it looks fancy here, but all you're doing is you're just changing numbers. These boxes just have numbers. Again, 2 million numbers times 30 frames a second, that's all they have, these 2 million numbers. And so when you are rendering or you're watching your video with a bunch of color correction, for each frame, for each pixel, it has to take each pixel and it has to put it through each of these transformations up here. And then again, if you have a transformation down here, we have to put another transformation, right? And another one down here. And these transformations, now they're calculated using algorithms essentially to apply curves to all the numbers. I'm not going to get into that, but in a very simple method, you just have to assume it's just adding all these things. So it's taking a number, it's saying, okay, add these, subtract these, add these, subtract these, 6 times until you get your final visual thing, and that's what you get. So yes, there are many ways of doing things, but just keep in mind, behind the scenes, it only has 3 numbers, red, green, and blue, per pixel to deal with. And the transformation, the modification of those pixels to make it brighter or change the hue or whatever, that's all it does. It changes those numbers. It doesn't change anything else. Again, there's no data for hue. There's no data for saturation. There's no data for brightness. The only data behind the scenes is this RGB for each pixel. That's it. And now we'll go into why the images look different in Apple versus Mac, and even here where people get confused. All right, so when we get images from the camera, we have different brightnesses. And so 255, right, is your brightest on your Y scale right here, and 1 would be your lowest. And let's just say this is just going over time. So, or it's just mapping them out. So each brightness basically maps 1 to 1. So this is the color, I should say. Let's say this would be a value of red, and this would be the brightness, right? So the brightness, each color, as it gets lighter and lighter, goes up in a linear fashion, right? So we see a linear fashion, and you can see it up here in this, in the middle thing. And this is if you just show it in a linear fashion, it says image gamma 1, that's what it's saying right here. So we're just showing each color gets the exact same brightness, or gets the same relative brightness as the change in color tone. And if you look at this image, you'll see, yeah, it looks really too dark. It doesn't look right. It looks better here. This is all psychological. This is all has nothing to do with the science or the science of it or the physics of it. It's just what looks better. So in this gamma, what you're doing is you're changing the curve, like this curve here, right, the red curve right here. You're changing the gamma. What you're basically saying is, okay, as we go up our scale of colors, let's actually make these a little bit darker or a little bit brighter, right? So they just look better. And generally you'll see, curves like this, the gamma curves. And this is what they use when you're shooting video too, but they use it in a different way. But for a monitor, you apply a curve to basically move the data around so it looks visually better. In other words, you basically taking these pixels and you're lightening them up a bit. You're lightening the midtones up a bit, and you're darkening the brights a teeny bit, and you're lightening the darks. And that's what you can see here, right? You're lightening the darks, right? And then on some of the really bright stuff, you're gonna bin it down a bit. So that's essentially what a gamma curve does. Now, Microsoft and Apple both have different gamma curves. I can't remember what, but one of them I think has 1.8 and one of them has 2.2. I think the PC has 2.2. I can't remember. It doesn't make a difference. But fundamentally, early in their development, they both pick different gammas. Because again, gamma's just taste, right? So Steve Jobs probably said, yeah, I like this one better. And Bill Gates said, I like this one better. And that's what it is. But none is right or wrong. They're just different. But we still see that problem today. And that's why when you look at a video on a Mac, it can sometimes look different than what you would expect on a PC because it's a different gamma applied. But it's the same data. Whatever gamma you have, it's still the same data. The data never changes. So if you make sure through your software that the gamma in your player, whether it's PC or Mac, let's just say it's always 2.2, PC or Mac, always 2.2, PC or Mac, they will look the same. And that's the problem that you're seeing. And really, at this level, this stage of your career as a YouTuber about video, yeah, I don't, I think it's time not to joke about it so much. You should know how this works. Okay, I should mention that a lot of things in the video I just said. Yeah, I mean, if you grade your color expecting for a 2.2 gamma and then you display it at 1.8, it's going to look funky. So that's another reason why you're seeing funky colors, because you're grading for one gamma and you're getting another. But assuming you grade for one gamma and everything plays on that one gamma, you will get the thing that you're expecting. All right, so I'm going to go into LUTs a little bit here, the final thing. All a LUT is, I'm just going to put it up here, is, as I mentioned, you have your pixels. So it's basically lookup tables. You have your pixels from 1 to 255, right? I remember how I said basically it goes on a scale where each change in shade equals a different brightness. So when it goes into the gamma curve, right, it will change. But in a raw sense, it's always just these values going up, right? Say midpoint 127. So all a lookup table is that you say, okay, in the greens, I'm going to have all these values. Instead of a gamma curve that's going to change them, a LUT table is just a box that basically says for each of these colors, replace it with this. So instead of 127, for whatever reason, put in a 123. Instead of a 1, put in a 2. Instead of 255, put in 254. That's all a LUT is. When people sell you LUTs, all they're doing is selling you 255 numbers for red, green, and blue. So a total of whatever that is. Add them up. But so it's like 750. It's just basically 750 numbers that will transform your values for those colors into something else. That's it. That's it. And one of the interesting things to me about what goes on with selling all these LUTs is they're fixing a problem that the person created for themselves in the first place, which really cracks me up. So when a camera comes out of a factory, again, it's getting the linear data and it maps it 1 to 255. And the camera already has a built-in curve in a sense that will take the middle 6 essential stops of information and map that to your 100 and 255 data space, right? So it maps it here to be the best fidelity of colors that you could possibly want. So you can take a LUT and you can change it. But of course, because everything looks pretty good, there's no reason to buy a LUT and change it because it already looks very pretty. And actually, if you just shoot Rec 709 and you just fiddle with the dials, you will get any color you want with the lowest noise possible. That's just the truth. But, people are bored with that. I guess it takes just too much skill, and, people want something. They want to make things more complicated so they feel like they're doing more. So the whole LUT industry is just It's just, it's just a type of like kidding yourself. It's like you're in a Spinal Tap movie and everybody wants to put the amplifier to 11. It's just it's nonsense. So the way it happens is, let's just say you again. This is be assuming like you're outside on a cloudy day, right? And you're looking at the person, and they look fine, and you're doing Rec 709, and everything is perfect, and everything is great. But then let's just say the person goes outside, and they say, oh, okay, well, a person's outside, same hideous person, but there's some clouds. I want to get the clouds in here. Well, the clouds are way up here because the camera will actually sense internally 14 bits of information, not 255, something like 16 million or whatever shades of color. So these log shooting profiles, what they do is that they say, okay, well, if you shoot an S log, like for Sony log, and there are various versions. Again, each version depending on how steep the curve is, right? The curve could be more like that, it could be like this, whatever the curve is, right? So all these logs, Canon logs, C log, but they all work in the same way. And the way that they work is to say, okay, well, if you want the clouds, I would need to get some detail out of these, these pixels here. Right now, the way I have it, where I'm just maximizing the saturation, the color fidelity within the 6 stops of dynamic range in the middle of your image, I only have 255 slots to work with, 255 shades of red, green, and blue. So, okay, well, the only thing I can do, again, the only possible thing you can do, because you only have 255, again, if you can shoot raw, get around this, but you have only have 255, it's like, okay, listen, if the clouds are really important to you, you probably won't notice that much. So I'm just going to steal some data points from the midtones, and I'm going to put them here. So you have your scale, right, from 1 to 255. And basically what you're saying is that instead, let's just say 126 and 128, I'm not going to capture anything here. Because I'm going to take like 280 and 290, and I'm going to put them right here. I'm going to take those two values way up there that will show detail in the clouds, and I'll put them in your range of 255. And I'm going to do that by removing these values and filling this up some more. So that's what you get. So that's good. So yeah, you go outside, you don't really care, super concerned about the person's color in their face, you want the clouds, and then of course you probably want a dystopian look of Handmaid's Tale or whatever, all these science fiction. So yeah, the color's bad, but you don't care because you want that dystopian look, you want the clouds, all's fine. But then one day you're like, oh no, I want to shoot something that has like bright colors and it's realistic, and I'm shooting S-Log because everybody shoots log, because they just do. Log is the best. We all know it. Everybody says shoot an S-Log. That's the best. Oh, oh yeah, there's some guys like Maxotics out there saying you don't know what the F you're doing. But, what does he know? Like, he doesn't have all these really cool cameras and this cool setup and, this pretty girlfriend. What does he know? So anyway, you shoot in your S-Log inside in controlled lighting. You don't realize that when you're shooting log, you're now trading some intertones. So you look at it and you're like, oh man, the skin tone isn't really right. So then this guy somebody says, oh, well, I can sell you a LUT. And that LUT will put the right number for these numbers here. These numbers don't exist, but I'll give you the right number because, again, these numbers, the 126 will probably just equal 125 because you have to substitute some values in the middle. So you're saying, okay, I'm going to do a LUT for here, and then I'm going to change these colors. The problem is it never works. It cannot work. I mean, it might look very pretty, and that's all that happens. You buy a LUT, and you apply it to if you shot S-Log, and you look at the image, and you say it looks really nice, and then you just say, okay, well, it looks nice. Everybody says it looks nice. This guy's famous, whatever. So we're good. Even though, naggingly, you're looking like, what? It doesn't look good. Like, I'm not happy with it. It's not like how I really want it to look. And the reason is you don't have the color to replace. The color that you want for, let's just say, that reddish tone in the skin tone, the color that you want has been traded for a color higher up to fill in, to give your clouds some detail. Because again, you have 256 values. That's it. You can't expand that beyond there. And so that's what's going on. The whole LUT industry is just fine. And it's it's aspirational. You want to believe that you can get the right LUT and you're going to do it. And many Camera Conspiracies videos are, where he tries to keep applying all these LUTs, and he, part of him is like, yeah, it looks really cool, really cool, but you just make a joke like, yeah, but I don't know. Like, but maybe it's just I need the Nikon LUT, right? He's always like, okay, well, it's not working, but maybe I need the Nikon LUT, or the Canon LUT, or the Sony LUT, or it's this Davinci's problems, or it's Premiere's problems. Like, there's always a problem somewhere. It's like, it's just me. I'm just not applying it right. I'm just doing it wrong. And what I'm telling you is, no, you're not doing it wrong. You're trying to do the impossible. You don't have the data to replace. You don't have an original tone in the midtones for the face. And if you don't have them, you can't replace them. So no LUT is ever going to do it. The only fix is you shoot Rec. 709, which is going to give you your lowest noise, best saturated image, and you control your light and you're good. Nobody, in my opinion, should shoot any S-Log type profile indoors with controlled lighting unless they want that dystopian look. But even then, you could get the dystopian look just by shooting Rec. 709 and adjusting the brightness and doing all. The footage could be made to look like that way anyway. Because again, you're controlling the light. You're controlling exactly what goes into the 1 to 255. So that's my final thing on the LUTs. So I've covered, yes, the vector scopes. You're just looking at legacy. Oscilloscopes based on you don't want to generate voltages that are outside your ability to capture them on magnetic tape or to display them on TV. They've borrowed that over into digital, which is sort of silly because once you're outside your data range, it doesn't make a difference. There's no going above it or no pulling from below it. You got what you got. And the second thing, there's no brightness information in video editors. They're just the colors. The gamma will change your brightness, your relative brightness later on. Well, I mean, obviously you do it in a linear fashion in your video editor, but your TV will always have the last word. And then finally, this whole idea of LUTs that you're applying to shooting logs on your video cameras is a whole market. It's like a whole creative endeavor of I have nothing against it. I mean, it gives a lot of fun to people, but really, if you just want really good color, understand how it works and work the way the camera was intended to be used. You want to get the clouds? Fine, use S-Log, but understand what you're doing. There's no free lunch. Hope if I didn't answer anybody's questions, just ask in the comments.